Speaking of brilliance, ladies and gentlemen, from now, where are you, Professor?
Well, I'm on the corner of Bromide and Beryl Street.
Bromide and Beryl Street in Broken Hill. Wonderful. Professor Ian Plimer. Am I right in suggesting you could have written a wonderful book sort of along the lines of Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Well, you gave me an idea when I heard that in the intro. I think it'd be good.
Yeah, well, you could, because you could mix up a little of everything that you are an expert in, which is so many things.
Well, I once wrote a book about the island of Milos, and I integrated the geology with the archaeology and the history. The place just fascinated me so much. I thought, well, I'll write a book. And I was talking to the CEO of the local mining company, and that company mines bentonite, which is an industrial mineral. And I mentioned this, and he said, "Oh, look, why don't you write it for our Christmas book?" And we continued to have a few more fermented fluids, and then about 4 months later, I got a phone call from him saying, "Well, where is it?" And I said, "Where's what?" He said, "You're from a corporate book. We've got all the planning done for this. We knew you'd forgotten, and this is the deal. We're going to fly your wife and you to the island of Milos, which is 90 nautical miles south of Piraeus in Greece. We're going to fly your wife and you there, but you have a single ticket. When we get the manuscript, we'll fly you back home."
So how long did it take you to write the manuscript?
Well, look, a book came out in 2000, so I can speak the truth now. It took me about 8 days, but we stayed there for 2 weeks.
Ah, lovely. I think that would be a very, very nice experience. Professor, a question. The center, what is at the center of the Earth? Right in the middle. I'm assuming there's a kind of a core there, is there?
Yes, the Earth is layered. It's got a continental crust and an oceanic crust. And then beneath that is the mantle, which is also layered. And then beneath that is an outer core and then an inner core. And the inner core is composed of iron and nickel alloy, with a few other things in there too, minor amounts of other things. And we know that, even though we've not drilled down there or been down there, we know that because fragmented planetoids have a type of meteorite called an iron meteorite. We know that from measuring the density of the Earth and measuring its rotation and working out that there must be something very dense in the middle of the Earth. So in the centre of the Earth is a core of iron nickel alloy, but the outer core is liquid and the inner core is solid. And in the outer core you get a lot of currents of molten material moving around, and that gives us the magnetic field. We have quite a bit of electricity within the planet. So we're quite a charged object with layering from the centre to the outside of the planet.
Oh, Tony's just saying something to me. You want free electricity? What?
Hi, Ian, Tony here. How about we put a big wire down to the centre of the Earth and we'll get free electricity? Would that work?
Well, it's easier than that. We have many solar wind facilities who create electricity and then they can't sell it, although they get paid for it, or the grid can't handle it, which is the most common phenomenon. And so they just pump it into the ground. So we have a renewable energy system where people get paid for waste.
Yeah, it's very weird. You know, here's an interesting fact too. Last year, Australia exported enough uranium to generate 109% of our domestic electricity. But we're not allowed to use it.
No, well, that's absolute madness. I hope people are waking up to this. The bulk of the civilised world does have nuclear reactors, and many evolving and developing countries have nuclear reactors. They're quite common. The generation of nuclear reactors around now are very efficient, and if people really are concerned about emissions of plant food, then nuclear is the only option. I'm not concerned about feeding plants. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Coal-fired electricity has been the cheapest and most reliable for a very long period of time, and our whole infrastructure is set up for coal-fired powered electricity, yet we're building a new infrastructure based on sunbeams and sea breezes, which don't provide electricity 24/7.
It's very weird. We have been sold a very strange pup, and I got no idea why. I saw something, I was going to say interesting, but it's kind of alarming, really. With great pride, they were showing these school children. I mean, they were sort of preschool. I probably put them about 4 or 5. And they were being lectured and taught all this climate change stuff, being fed to the kids in various school campaigns. And I suppose the teachers don't have any real choice as to whether they go on down that track or not. But here are these young minds being told, lectured on climate change, for God's sake.
Well, I suspect that propaganda is going to come to bite us in generations to come when people can't read, can't write, can't think, can't do mental calculations, can't structure an argument. This to me is just child abuse.
Yeah, it's not a particularly optimistic picture that you paint, but I think it's probably pretty right.
We're seeing hints of it already. I mean, it's very hard to employ people now who, even though they might have letters behind their name, who you can really say are educated. It's becoming quite a problem.
Once they get on a bandwagon, they want to stay there, and they want to sort of suppress stories like this. I've got a story here in front of me. Huge fire sparked by a Mercedes-Benz electric vehicle adds to safety concerns dogging the industry. Police move a burnt-out Mercedes-Benz electric vehicle from the underground parking lot of an apartment building in South Korea. There's a photograph of it here too. It took just seconds for an underground South Korean residential parking lot to be engulfed in flames. The culprit was a Mercedes-Benz EQE electric vehicle. The blaze incinerated dozens of cars nearby, scorched a further 100 vehicles, and forced hundreds of residents to emergency shelters as the buildings above the parking lot lost power, lost electricity. Nobody died, but the fire took 8 hours to extinguish. Now, clearly they're not going to be keen to put these vehicles, electric vehicles. I know they don't like transporting them in those vehicle ships that transport them around the world. But you're not going to be allowed to park these in underground car parks or under apartment buildings, surely?
Well, you cannot insure a car park now if you have electric vehicles in it.
Now, why doesn't that get talked about, I wonder?
Well, it doesn't fit the narrative. And the second thing is that these electric vehicle fires produce very, very toxic fume. They're very hard to put out, and this is not a first time. This has happened many, many times around the world. And to make it worse, these very intense fires, very hot fires, structurally weaken the concrete. So if this is in an underground car park and there's supporting piers there of concrete and they get very hot from one of these fires, you've got a severe structural problem in an apartment complex. So, you know, in my drive from Adelaide to Broken Hill on Wednesday, I didn't see a single electric vehicle. And I know why.
Ian, Tony here again. Do you remember also last year, it's actually worse than that, there was a car fire at Luton Airport, October last year. The whole building was demolished because all the other cars adjacent caught on fire. I've just got a photo of it here. The car park is just a charred wreck. And that, I imagine, was an electric car caused it.
Yes, I recall that now. Luton Airport probably does need a bit of replacement of some of the buildings anyway. It's a pretty scruffy part of the world.
Not the way to do it, though. Not the way to do it.
No, it certainly isn't the way to do it. And it doesn't matter whether you've got a Mercedes or a Tesla or whatever, if it's an electric vehicle, you are driving something that's quite dangerous.
And the insurance companies are going to sort of balk at that, aren't they?
Oh, they are already. The insurance premiums have gone up for electric vehicles. The longevity of electric vehicles is such that they have very little resale price, and electric vehicles are basically for people strutting around showing their peacock feathers and driving down from their house to the corner shop to get a litre of milk and coming back. That's basically their use.
Yeah, but damn inconvenient if you find yourself unable to park your car in a parking station, or if you have an apartment in town or somewhere and there's undercroft parking, and you can't do it, you're going to be very embarrassed and inconvenienced.
Well, it's just as inconvenient as having bans on petrol tankers go through tunnels on freeways. Yeah. For very good reasons, for safety reasons.
Yeah, sensible precaution, yeah.
Of course it is. So somewhere along the line, you have to have an eye to safety.
Yep, I agree. Someone sent me this. Often wondered why there are never any sacred sites where solar panels and wind farms are installed. Interesting.
Well, there are, but they don't get spoken about, and they just get bulldozed. So,
okay.
Most of the solar panels are on prime agricultural land, and the wind turbines are on land that, in many ways, is land that's not as valuable, but it's also hilly land where you quite often do have these sacred sites.
And the little note goes on to say, never any endangered flora or fauna either. Strange, isn't it?
Well, not at all. I mean, if the Greens were true Greens, they would be mounting the barricades against what the wind turbine complexes are doing to the environment. They're just flattening trees, killing wildlife, and while this is operational, they kill the birds and the bats, and on it goes. This is just an appalling situation. And so the Greens, they're not environmentalists. They're not concerned about the average person. They're only concerned about pushing their Marxist views in society.
Very strange. There's another little story going around about a coral reef core. They say they've been able to look back over the last 400 years of the coral reef. I don't know how long it would take for a coral reef to establish itself, but they say that they can predict, or they can establish, that this is the hottest temperature that the coral reefs have existed in over the last 400 years. Do you believe that?
Well, belief is not a word I use in science. It's a word of religion and politics. But the evidence telling us that temperatures go up and down. The evidence also shows that coral reefs love it warm. This is why we have them in the Red Sea, around the Bahamas. The Great Barrier Reef is actually a cool water coral reef compared with many of the others. We know from the Great Barrier Reef that over the last 2.4 million years, it's come and gone 17 times. So coral reefs come and go. Sea level goes up and down. Water temperature changes. This is part of the natural cycle of life on Earth. And so this is an attempt to scare people based on evidence showing that corals do reflect temperatures. They are cyclical, and that temperature measurement may well be a result of oceanic currents. It might not be due to the temperature changes on the planet. So you really have to think about these things very carefully.
They come to a conclusion, and then they argue back from that. They go out looking for stuff that'll substantiate what their conclusion is, I guess.
Well, I think that's the case. If you want to get a research grant to put drill holes into coral, which is the cheap bit, and then to measure the carbon and oxygen isotopes, which is the expensive bit, you need to have some sort of theory of human-induced global warming. And if you've got that, then you've got a very good chance of getting funded. Now, I say that with the ultimate of cynicism, because I have received many research grants when I was in my prime, which was back in the geological past. I also sat on the Australian Research Council for many years. I sat on the German Research Council. I sat on the Swedish Research Council. This is the way the system works. It works on PAL review and not peer review. It works on following the popular scare campaign. And when I was on the Australian Research Campaign, we were instructed by Minister John Dawkins to fund anything associated with cancer because there was a war on cancer. Now, I suspect the instruction would be, if it's not written and it's the subtext, to fund anything to do with climate.
Yep, no, I agree with that. You and I both live on the Glen Osmond fault line, don't we? Do you believe that is a worry?
It's not a worry, but we have had these faults move quite regularly as the Mount Lofty ranges are rising. Now, the Mount Lofty ranges have been rising for a long period of time, for tens of millions of years, due to compression, and that creates minor earth tremors and sometimes an earthquake. And I think the last earthquake that Adelaide had that was quite severely damaging was about 1954. I wasn't living in Adelaide then, so I can't remember exactly the date. So, yes, we have a chance to have our windows rattled. You have a more modern house than mine. Mine's an old Adelaide house, and it's on a slope. So the chances of me suffering damage are greater than you suffering damage. But then you've got a more modern house, which is probably not built to the standards that older houses were built to. So it's going to be a toss-up as to what our insurance bill will be, but hopefully you're insured against earthquakes and earth tremors. But you see the newspapers now, if you get a measurable tremor, they will call it an earthquake.
Oh, yeah.
That's so we measure earthquakes on the Richter scale, and that Richter scale is based on the amount of energy that's released in breaking the rocks. But we also have another scale called the modified Mercalli scale. And that scale is based on the damage that it does to buildings. Now, when the Newcastle earthquake took place, we were living in Newcastle. The buildings that got damaged were those that had curved brick walls. Those were built on sand, and remember your Bible, build upon the rock and not upon the sand, were built upon sand, and some buildings that were damaged in the earthquakes of the 1920s and the 1860s were also damaged. So they attacked buildings that were not well constructed, and even though it was an earth tremor and not an earthquake, there was a variable amount of damage based on the type of building, what the building was on, and how much maintenance the building had. So the modified Mercalli scale is a better scale to use because it's based on the actual damage.
Have you ever been to the Jenolan Caves, Professor?
Many times, and the weekend after next I'm going to be near there at Oberon.
Oh, yes, I know Oberon. Very cold spot in winter. What are you doing? What are you doing in Oberon?
I'm giving a talk at a conference and then turning around and coming back.
You're a gadabout, aren't you? You do get around.
I certainly am. But I was trying to think when the last time I was in Oberon, and it was 1963. I was banished to Oberon to recover from glandular fever. I've passed through Oberon a couple of times since then. There's a road that goes from Goulburn down across the Wallandilly River and up to Bathurst, and I've been on that road a couple of times, but I've never stopped at Oberon since 1963, so it'd be interesting to see if the trees have grown due to all that carbon dioxide in the air.
Let's hope they're flourishing. Have you ever heard of a thing called bisphenol?
Bisphenol is a highly toxic chemical. Bisphenol A is used in the resins of the blades of wind turbines, and it abrades from those wind turbines and spreads everywhere. Those wind turbines can't be recycled, so the blades are cut up and buried, and the bisphenol gets into the soil and gets into the water. It is banned in most Western countries, yet we have huge amounts of it in the turbine blades, and we are quite happy to put a highly toxic chemical over a very large area to save the environment. So, in effect, we're destroying the environment to save it.
Oh, yes, that's been done before. The reason I say this, the reason I ask you is that, and I've never quite quite understood why I hadn't heard of a lot of these developmental problems that kids suffer from these days, autism and things like that. There's a story that News Limited are running this morning, which says a common plastic additive found in everything from pacifiers to metal, which is where I guess the blades come in, and even paper receipts have been linked to an increased risk of autism in children. The new research, which tracked the development of over 6,000 infants, found higher levels of the chemical bisphenol A, or BPA, in pregnant mothers' urine, more than tripled the chances that a young person would develop autism symptoms by the age of 2, and worse still, boys were 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism by age 11, compared to those whose mothers had lower PBA levels during pregnancy. It's extraordinary that something like this doesn't get more publicity.
Well, it doesn't. But again, we have graduated from drinking potable water from the taps, where the water is treated between the dam and when you drink it, to walking around with a water bottle. And that is what's happening in the modern world. And the end result of that is microparticles of plastics are getting into people's bodies. Yeah. So for anyone that drinks bottled water, I suggest you go back to what we did as a kid. Yep. Put your mouth around the tap and turn it on, and sometimes water will squirt out your ears or spray everywhere. But that water, by having a reticulated water system, we have saved more lives than all the medical practices that have taken place over the last few centuries.
Wow. Wow. I remember they used to have bubblers, public sort of bubblers on the street. Never see a bubbler.
There's a few of them still left, and I'm quite happy to use them. I don't put my mouth on the
No,
metal,
I wouldn't advise it.
No, well, on the cold day, it could be stuck there.
True, and here's another one. It looks like we have found a solution to our plastic consumption issue, but maybe not. Initially, they saw paper straws as a solution to the plastic straw problem, but they have their own set of issues. They break down easily, making them difficult to use, so manufacturers tried to address this by making them stronger. However, this also makes them harder to recycle, and also there is a certain amount of poison in the additives. So look, nothing is safe. Can't do a thing.
I think you've just got to curl up, whimper and die. That's the solution to life.
Or just decide to live dangerously, recklessly. Now, I know you've got a board meeting in a couple of minutes.
And only 2 minutes. I'm the chairman, but I've just got to make sure that I lead by example and actually join it on time or almost on time.
Well, I wouldn't hold you up, Professor. Will you come in next week? Are you around the place?
Next week, yes, I will be in. I've got to be in Brisbane next week. Yes, I will walk down the hill to your place and enjoy the sunshine, hopefully, and see you eye to eye next week.
All right, I'll have the kettle on. Play it by ear.
Thank you very much.
Professor Ian Plimer, ladies and gentlemen.